Okay, wonderful. Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to our first of the guest speaker series of 2022. We're delighted to have you all join us this evening and hope you'll also be able to attend our other presenters' talks over the next 5 weeks. Simon will be providing further details on those and how this speaker series came about in a few moments. My name is Alex Miller, and I will be your moderator for this evening. In my day job, I work alongside Simon as Sustainability Officer at Rethink Green. On the call tonight, we have some local and familiar faces, including other speakers, plus the co-organizers and sponsors of this series, representing Next Economy North Bay. Just some housekeeping matters before we get going. I'd like to remind everyone to remain muted throughout today's presentation, though you may feel free to have your camera on, because it's always great to see faces in a Zoom room, but of course, up to you. If you have any questions, please make a note as we go along, and we will allow time for a question and answer session at the end of each presentation and encourage your participation, so feel free. You can either raise the hand to signal that you'd like to ask a question in person, or you can always place your question in the chat. Our speakers will also be putting together some resources which we can circulate together with the presentations and contact information in the days following each presentation. Before we dive in, I'd like to acknowledge the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850, and the land on which we are gathering today, commonly known as North Bay, is situated in traditional Anishinaabe territory on lands occupied by the people of Nipissing and Duckies First Nation. I'd like to acknowledge how grateful we are for the opportunity to gather today and thank all the generations of people who have been stewards of these lands. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection to this place. And we also recognize the contributions which Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly connected to our collective commitment to deliver on the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation in our communities. Gathering remotely via Zoom also means that we get to connect with people from all across Turtle Island, which means often our land acknowledgements should stretch beyond what we call North Bay itself. So if you don't happen to know which traditional lands or territories you're joining us from today, I'd recommend nativeland.ca or native-land.ca as a great resource. The website features a map of all the territories, languages, and treaties across land many of us refer to as Canada. And if you're joining us from afar today, and if you're comfortable, I do encourage you to share in the chat where you're joining us from. Many of you may be feeling fatigued from the pandemic right now, just like myself, while also asking the question, well, what's next, right? And maybe that's why you're here today. You only have to look at the heat waves, forest fires, and the more recent, devastation caused by a supposedly 1 in 1,000 year flash flooding event over in BC to know that something maybe isn't right. Here in Northern Ontario specifically, we've experienced some extreme weather driven by changes in our climate over the past 5 years, ranging from the Temagami and Parry Sound forest fires in 2018, and the resulting air quality issues caused for most of that summer. Record snowfall and snow melt in North Bay, Nipissing District in February 2019. Record flooding and widespread destruction, which led to the town of Mattawa to declare a flooding state of emergency in May of 2019. And here in North Bay, a record low of -45 degrees Celsius, including the wind chill, set on 28th of January 2019, and a record high spring temperature of 32 degrees C, not including humidity, of course, set on the 27th of May in 2020. You know, some fear the effects of changing government and policies and how they may affect their way of life. And you only have to look at the chat on some mainstream and social media platforms to know that climate change denial is real. And a quick skim read should tell you just how far we as a community and society have yet to go. But to positively identify the solutions, right, and envision a new future so we can all build back better is what's important. And that's what this series is intended to do, to demonstrate sustainability is possible and to really help inspire further action in response to the threat of climate change. So I'm now going to give I'm now going to give a brief overview of what we'll be covering today. First, we'll have Simon Blakely, who give us a brief introduction to Next Economy North Bay, the host of the speaker series, and also Rethink Green, which is a Northern Ontario-based environmental programs incubator, which enables events like this to happen. Next, we'll have the star of the show take the wheel, Kylie-Anne, a climate engagement specialist for climate action in Dufferin County, will deliver a presentation on the co-benefits of community climate action. And I'll then conduct a short interview with Kylie, I guess, both opening the floor to questions. And yeah, with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Simon. Take it away, Simon.
Hey, so thank you, Alex. Welcome everybody to this. It's our first virtual speaker series of 2022. So delivering a speaker series here in North Bay has been on the agenda for quite some time now. The pandemic has, for obvious reasons, taken precedent over the last 2 years. But with the province now suggesting that better times lie ahead, we figured we'd play our part in identifying how that might be. First of all, I'd like to provide some background to our work so far. So founded in early 2019, Next Economy North Bay comprises a grassroots collective of local business and community leaders who are seeking to build capacity so the city of North Bay and surrounding communities may become leaders in the modern low-carbon economy. It aims to provide local, reputable, and publicly accessible body of knowledge and information which acknowledges the existence of climate change, and at the same time showcases some of the many ways that communities, businesses, and households can transition to a cleaner, greener, and more equitable economy. So our first initiative was a Sustainability Expo that was held at the Grand Event Centre in October 2019. Some of you may recall, as you attended. The event included 5 guest speakers, plus a good investing workshop and keynote presentation from Tim Nash, the sustainable economist. Had a sustainability trade show, which included over 30 vendors. And it was an all-day event, which attracted 200 people and resulted in approximately 10,000 unique views, likes, clicks, etc. on social media. In our second initiatives, still impacted by the pandemic, we signed North Bay up to take place in a national initiative known as the Commuter Challenge. And this took place between the 30th of May and June the 5th, 2021. Our local challenge was designed to be fun, informative, and socially distanced. We applied a multimedia approach, including media releases, radio interviews, social media posts, newsletters, even some guerrilla marketing, giving flyers out on the bike path. So we produced a catalogue of short videos, including community partners, and we talked about the benefits of active transportation. The way the challenge works is the public is encouraged to sign up for free, and participants register as a workplace or an individual. And they record the postal codes for journeys taken, both at the beginning and end of their destination, and they select the non-car mode of transportation taken. And from this, users can see their impact. And this includes the amount of emissions saved as a carbon dioxide equivalent measurement, CO2, the kilojoules of energy consumed as calories burned, so in pursuing a more active lifestyle. So it's basically like a carbon calculator and a Fitbit, all combined in one. We're pleased to report that in our first go, North Bay came 4th out of 14 registered communities in the province of Ontario for participation. We hope to build on that success in 2022. So some of you may be wondering, how did we achieve this? Our relationship with Rethink Green actually dates back to 2019 when they supported the delivery of the Sustainability Expo. Rethink Green offers a variety of programs and services which aim to bring together ideas, partners, and resources to build more sustainable communities here in Northeastern Ontario. And as an environmental programs incubator, Rethink Green creates community networks which promote creative collaboration and dialogue about local and global environmental issues. We empower our member organizations to meet their environmental goals. The organization also provides logistical support to support grassroots initiatives such as Next Economy North Bay, including the administration, organization, and delivery of public-facing events. This helps increase awareness and builds our own capacity to act on climate change here in the city of North Bay. So over the past 2 to 3 years, as our relationship strengthened, I actually joined Rethink Green as its program director in April 2020. There, I now oversee the Green Economy North and Smart Green Communities programs, among other responsibilities. And as you may have seen from the speaker agenda and our recent media release, I will be delivering my own presentation on February the 17th, when I hope to share details about some very exciting news that we only just learned about, some funding which will enable us to expand our capacity to further support businesses, households, and communities in the years to come. So with that, I'll hand back to Alex to introduce Kylie, our presenter today.
Great, thank you, Simon. And yeah, of course, having Simon wear both hats for Rethink Green and Next Economy North Bay sometimes is a great connection. It helps us make this happen. Simon's done a lot of great work trying to put this all together. So hats off to you, Simon. All right, so without further ado, I will introduce today's speaker. Kylie-Anne Grube is a climate engagement specialist with the County of Dufferin, working to foster community engagement in support of the Dufferin Climate Action Plan, a local strategy to build resilience to the impacts of climate change and achieve net zero emissions by 2050. After graduating with a BA in English Studies at Nipissing University in 2018, Kylie-Anne earned a master's degree in English and Cultural Studies at McMaster University, specializing in the environmental humanities and climate change communications. Inspired to further action by the IPCC's special report on global warming of 1.5 degrees C, Kylie-Anne went on to pursue a master's degree in climate change at the University of Waterloo, graduating in 2020 as part of the first generation of climate change professionals in Canada. Drawing upon this interdisciplinary expertise, today her approach to climate action is rooted in principles of justice, equity, and co-creation. Through her work in communications and engagement, Kylie-Anne is passionate about crafting compelling content that invites people into the climate conversation. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Kylie-Anne can take over and share hers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this evening. Welcome to my kitchen. I'm excited to chat climate change with you all. And I'm just going to pull up my screen here for us. All right. Can you give me a thumbs up, Alex, if it looks good? Perfect. All right. So hello, as Alex said, I'm the climate engagement specialist with the County of Dufferin, which is an upper tier municipality in Southern Ontario. But I am also a resident of North Bay. I've lived here most of my life, and I was gone for a few years for graduate school, and I returned in, I guess it would be March of 2020, right at the beginning of this pandemic. And so I'm really excited for this opportunity to connect with folks who also have climate change on the radar, and really looking forward to that Q&A session at the end to hear from some of you as well. So today, the kind of goal of my presentation is to invite us to reconceptualize the idea of what climate action is. That is something that sometimes we think requires a lot of sacrifice. You know, we have to stop doing this, we can't do that. And in the process of protecting our planet, sometimes this narrative emerges that our lives have to get worse in the process. So instead, I'm going to take a turn that is hopefully more motivating and invite us to consider how, when we take a bigger picture approach, we can take action on climate change in a way that is going to bring about a lot of benefits for our community. So whether that's social, cultural, environmental, economic, as well as benefits to our health, these are all things that we can create in our community and also in our individual lives. And these are what we call co-benefits. So to give you a little overview of what we'll be talking about today, I'll first start by providing you with a little bit of context about the County of Dufferin and our climate action journey, as they're going to serve as a little bit of a case study for us this evening as we talk about this idea of co-benefits. Next, we're going to talk about what co-benefits are, what they can look like, and why they are so important, before moving into a conversation about how we integrated co-benefits into the planning of our local climate action plan in Dufferin. And then finally, recognizing that most of you tuning in this evening are probably not municipal staff or members of council. I mean, if you are, hello. But I'd also like to mention how this idea of co-benefits can really be applied at any level of climate planning. And I'll give us a few examples to look at. So we'll get started here with the Dufferin context. So Dufferin County is an upper tier municipality in southwestern Ontario. And we have 8 member municipalities who range in population from about 1,800 to 30,000 people. And that refers to our largest urban center, which is Orangeville, which some of you may know about. And Dufferin is a largely rural region. It's known for its rivers, rolling hills, and outdoor recreation space, as well as its agriculture community. But there's also some really lovely and charming urban centers that have a small town feel and a really beautiful balance with natural beauty, which makes Dufferin a pretty attractive place to be. The county has, however, recognized that climate change is putting our community at risk in Dufferin. So the places and the things that we all value and depend upon, so from health, safety, and well-being, cultural and traditional practices, financial security, and the natural ecosystems that we are so intimately a part of, we know that climate change is going to have cross-cutting impacts across the Dufferin community. And as Alex had said, we're kind of in the same boat here in North Bay. It's the same challenge. And so Dufferin knew that urgent action was necessary to, first of all, limit climate change by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. And this is part of that global collective effort that we are all a part of. And then secondly, we knew we had to do something to prepare our community for the inevitable impacts of climate change, to ensure that our community is going to thrive into the future rather than maybe just survive. To give you a bit of insight on our climate action journey, in Dufferin, it started in May of 2018 when the council joined what is called the Partners for Climate Protection program. And I'll jump ahead a slide here just to give you a little overview of what this program is. So the Partners for Climate Protection program is supported by 2 organizations. The first is the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and the second is ICLEI, Local Governments for Sustainability. And these are both organizations that really help municipal governments build capacity and get these kinds of projects off the ground. And what they've done is they've laid out this 5-step milestone framework for municipalities to work through, with the ultimate goal of reducing local greenhouse gas emissions, all while fostering a ton of co-benefits in the community. So the first milestone is to establish what is called a baseline greenhouse gas inventory and a forecast as well. And what this is looking at, on an annual basis, where are all the emissions coming from in our community, so we can identify what those high emitting sectors are. And then we also take a look at, well, if we don't take any action to reduce them, what can we expect our emissions to look like in the future? The second step is to set greenhouse gas reduction targets. And then milestone 3 is to create a local action plan to make that happen. So it's outlining the actions that a community needs to take to achieve their reduction targets. Milestone 4 and 5 of the program work somewhat simultaneously, where you work on implementing the plan while at the same time you are kind of reflecting on progress and reporting the results back to the community. Here in Dufferin, we've selected to do that on an annual basis to keep us transparent and accountable. So that's kind of a quick overview of this program that Dufferin County has signed up for. And between 2018 and 2021, we moved through milestones 1 through 3 of the program. So we created the inventory, we set our greenhouse gas targets, and we created a local climate action plan. And this was passed by our Dufferin County Council in March of 2021. So we are just kind of coming up to our 1-year anniversary on the plan, which is exciting. And the goal of the Dufferin Climate Action Plan is to achieve net zero emissions in our community. And what net zero is that we are taking actions to get our local emissions as close to zero as possible, while also taking action to remove any unavoidable emissions from the atmosphere. And that can be done through natural or technological solutions. In the Dufferin context, I mentioned we do have a large agricultural community. And so there is potential for some of our farmers to actually sequester and store carbon in the soil. And there's a lot of emerging research on how to quantify this. But the #1 goal is always to start with reducing those emissions as close as possible. When we talk about removing any of those unavoidable ones, that's really a secondary action. And the plan also has another component where we know that, again, the climate is changing and we are going to see impacts in our community. So we've also identified a few actions to ensure that we continue to thrive into the future, knowing that events like extreme heat, droughts, floods, and storms of all kinds are going to happen more often and be more severe. So as we move into the implementation of the Climate Action Plan, that is kind of our ultimate goal. To give you an idea of what our impact has been so far in our kind of first year since launching the plan, we have quite a few projects that we're getting off the ground, but one that we can kind of report on that we have under our belt was the installation of what we call the Charge Up in Dufferin network. And this is a network of 24 electric vehicle charging stations throughout the county. And these are all publicly accessible. And we had a really fun launch event for these stations in the beginning of December, where we had municipal representatives come out, they gave some speeches, and we had the community come out as well. And they had the opportunity to meet with electric vehicle experts from an organization called Plug and Drive. And they actually got to get behind the wheel of a couple different makes and models and take them for a test drive. So that was a really fun event. Looking ahead for 2022, in Dufferin, we're working on the very early stages of planning a home energy retrofit financing program. We're midway through right now the creation of a local adaptation plan, which is really going to act like a complementary plan to the one that we've just been talking about, which is mostly focused on those emissions reductions. And then our last project, or big one anyways, is we're working with some of our neighboring municipalities on a pilot program for farmers so that they can adopt regenerative agriculture practices on their farm. And if you haven't heard of regenerative agriculture before, essentially what that is practices that farmers can incorporate into their operations that are climate friendly. So we really want to support them there. So now we'll move into a discussion of what co-benefits are when we talk about climate action. And then I'll tell you a little bit how we integrated this within that Dufferin Climate Action Plan. So taking action on climate change is a really great opportunity to reimagine our community and build safe, healthy, and equitable futures for both people and environment. By acknowledging that climate change is a really complex problem and it's connected with so many other issues in areas like public health, community well-being, our local ecosystems, local economies. When we recognize the connections with all of those things, then we can strategically design climate actions to create positive benefits across these multiple issues. So these are things like the creation of green jobs, cleaner air, improved health and well-being for community members, and also some benefits for our environments like improving water quality and biodiversity. And these are really just naming a few. So again, these benefits are what we call co-benefits. Co-benefits are the positive social, cultural, economic, and environmental benefits of a climate policy or measure. And these benefits, to clarify, they go beyond an impact to greenhouse gas emissions. So for instance, we can reduce emissions by choosing to walk more or bike more. Or I did a presentation with some of our students in Dufferin in November, and they thought that pogo sticks would be a really fun way to get around and also friendly for the climate. So I liked that one. But when we choose these low greenhouse gas ways of moving about, we're making those reductions, but at the same time, we're improving air quality, we're getting active, we're making improvements to our physical and mental health. We're also increasing more equitable access to community amenities. And there's also a boost in exposure for local businesses when people are on foot or on bike. And we can also notice an increase in the amount of green spaces. So when we create these active transportation corridors, we see more trees, more gardens pop up, which is again, great for our mental health. And it's also great for our local biodiversity as well. So that's just a little example. And evidence shows that when we carefully plan climate action, we can see multiple positive non-climate benefits. So to give you a few statistics and facts here, it's projected that in Ontario, in the energy efficiency sector alone, we're going to see about 52,900 new jobs per year from now to 2030. Another, co-benefit when we talk about electric vehicles, a Canadian EV driver can expect to save as much as $2,000 a year on fuel alone because electricity is less expensive than gas. And this also doesn't even consider the savings that are going to be realized when switching to an EV because they have less components, which means they're going to break down less. So you're spending a lot less money on maintenance and repair. On the right side of the screen here, you can kind of see a list of what co-benefits could look like. It's a pretty big list, but it's certainly not exhaustive. So some of the co-benefits of climate action could look like the diversification of our local economy, supporting a clean energy transition, the reduction of costs and the increase in savings for business owners, residents. We can see an increase in air quality, water quality, and also local food security. Things like community livability and viability are also a huge co-benefit of climate action. And it's one that's not often talked about, but it's really, really important to consider when we're doing planning. So to show you what this could all look like in action, I've pulled an example from Halton Hills, and I'll talk a little bit about their green development standards. So green development standards are essentially criteria that municipalities set out to ensure that new construction is environmentally, socially, and economically responsible. So in Halton Hills, they developed a set of green development standards in 2010. They updated them in 2014. And essentially they operate like a menu approach. So developers can look at different action items like energy conservation, community design, and other sustainable and green features. And each one of those criteria has a point number associated with it. And they just have to meet a minimum threshold. And so some of the co-benefits that we can see through these green development standards in Halton Hills, they've reported on green economy opportunities, more active lifestyles of people living in these new development areas, improved stormwater management, energy savings for the people who are ultimately occupying these buildings. Again, an increase in health and wellness, civic pride, and increased social interactions. These neighborhoods are also, they have a lot of green space usually, and disaster resilience as well. So again, knowing that our climate is changing, these homes are better able to protect their residents in the case of extreme weather events. And when Halton Hills put together these green development standards, they really had these co-benefits in mind. So when they went through a process of stakeholder consultation and a review of best practices, and they brought developers into the conversation. That way, when they kind of put these green development standards out there, they could maximize these co-benefits in their community. Why do co-benefits matter? So hopefully I've made a pretty good argument for them so far, but I'm gonna kind of push that a little further with a few more points. Sometimes we look at climate action as kind of this single issue in isolation, but when we consider co-benefits, there's usually a far stronger case for climate action. First of all, we can see an overall increase in community desire to take action on climate change. And this happens when we use co-benefits to connect to people with what they value. So co-benefits might help persuade the general public around the desirability of climate action. And this is especially true for people who either don't believe in climate change or they don't think it's that big of a threat. It's something happening elsewhere. It's something happening in the future. They might not think it's affecting them now. But when we bring in these co-benefits and show people how climate action can have immediate and local benefits, they're far more likely to see buy-in. Another reason they matter is it's an opportunity to address multiple community priorities at once. And this means that municipalities can be more efficient with limited resources, and they can also access more funding and partnership opportunities. And this is really important for smaller municipalities like us in Dufferin and also here in North Bay, where we kind of want to maximize all the resources and time that we have. And lastly here, there is an opportunity to identify and engage with a wider range of community partners in planning and implementation. And similarly, this is because we're connecting with people around things that actually matter to them. And they're far more likely to collaborate and join in on projects when they can see how it directly impacts the work that they're already doing. And just a fun fact here is that research has shown that when cities consider co-benefits when they plan their action plans, they usually end up reporting 2.5 times more climate actions than cities who didn't. So by looking at these co-benefits, so many more climate actions are usually identified in the process, which accelerates the progress that we really need to do. All right, so the other thing here I'd like to talk about is conflicts. I've talked about co-benefits, what they are, why they matter. But at the same time, when we consider the co-benefits in climate planning, we also have to consider the potential trade-offs with other social, economic, or environmental objectives, because they might intensify existing problems or create new ones. And an example I'll share here is around wind turbines, which can be kind of a contentious item in the climate change world. Some potential conflicts with these include noise complaints. People have reported disruptions to the natural landscape. Essentially, they think they're eyesores. There's nothing more than that. They're just eyesores to people. But there is also a pretty legitimate concern around threats to birds and bats. Though I will say there's some emerging research on this that gives us hope that this won't be as important of a conflict in the future. So when we look at that big picture and take into account all of the potential co-benefits of an action and all the potential conflicts, then we can really strategically design an action to maximize the good and minimize the bad. And that helps us avoid unintended consequences of climate actions. The last piece on this I want to mention is a conversation around justice and equity. And you may have noticed a couple slides back, we had that chart of all the different potential co-benefits. And under the social one, equity was mentioned. And this is pretty common in the literature around co-benefits, but I would like to invite us to think of this as separate. This is how we approached it in Dufferin, and I believe in this pretty strongly. Because we don't want to consider justice and equity as an add-on to a climate action or a potential benefit that's like a nice to have, right? Instead, these principles really have to be deeply embedded within the planning process and again, during the implementation process and in deep conversation with the communities that are affected. And this is so important because when we don't do this planning properly, all of these wonderful co-benefits that we're talking about are not going to be distributed equitably within our communities. And research has actually shown that equity-seeking communities are less likely to benefit from or even to have access to some of these climate solutions that we're talking about. So when we work through the planning process, it's really important to ask questions like, who is going to benefit from this proposed action? And on the flip side, who is not going to be benefiting from it? And once you kind of ask those questions, then your follow-up question to that is, well, how are we going to redesign this action to make sure that these co-benefits are distributed equitably within our community? And again, it's really important to bring in these affected community members to these conversations and have them a part of it. All right, so now I'm going to move on and talk about how we integrated co-benefits into the Dufferin Climate Action Plan. And hopefully this kind of serves as an example of how a community has taken this on. Our process was pretty simple and straightforward. We have, limited staff, limited resources. And so we also looked to other municipalities to see what they were doing and borrowed from their best practices. So potentially our story here could serve as a little bit of an example as to what we could look at doing in the North. So before we get into that, I just want to quickly mention when I talk about this process, it was not just our climate division that went through it. Our climate division is pretty small. There's myself and our manager of climate and energy. And so when we created this plan, we knew that community voices had to be represented and they had to be part of the process. So our Dufferin community at large was involved in the process through a multi-step engagement process that was mostly digital. We did it during COVID. So, I think there's opportunities to improve on that as we go. And then the other way we engaged the community was through a group that we called the Dufferin Climate Change Collaborative, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we just call it the DC4. It also sounds cool like that, so we liked it. And who the DC4 was, they were members of the Dufferin community representing different perspectives, different sectors. So we had some staff from our member municipalities. We had representatives from utilities, conservation authorities, academic researchers were there, public health was there, farmers were there, and we also included local youth. So we had a high school student and a university student as part of this collaborative, really to make sure that we could hear a diversity of voices from the community and they could help us identify what those co-benefits are and why they were important to our community. So into the process, again, we did this with our climate division and our Dufferin County Collaborative and members of the public. The first thing we did was create a vision for our community. And a community vision is essentially a shared image of the future. It's expressed in a short statement and it encompasses a community's values and aspirations. So in Dufferin County, the vision that we kind of co-created was that we wanted to be a net zero and resilient community for future and current generations, while enhancing the health and well-being of community members, building equitable and vibrant neighborhoods, preserving and enhancing local biodiversity and natural systems, and fostering a prosperous and innovative local economy. And so this vision is a really great starting point as a community to identify what are some of those high-level co-benefits that we want to see in our community. So while we're working towards that really long-term goal of net zero, what are we going to achieve for ourselves along the way? So once we had that vision, we went off and created a draft list of all the potential actions that we could take as a community to get us to that target of net zero. And we did that through research, looking at, again, to other municipalities for best practices. And then we brought this to our Dufferin County Collaborative, and we asked them to go through a process of co-benefit assessment. It was a really rewarding process to go through each and every action and identify all of the potential social benefits, environmental benefits, economic benefits. Up on the screen here is a sample of what one of those worksheets looked like for just one of the actions. You can see in the middle section, we also identified any potential conflicts. And as I mentioned on the bottom right, we did pull out that justice and equity impact as its own separate consideration. The importance to us of going through this process was that if we are not identifying all the potential co-benefits, then we might be missing really key opportunities to design and implement climate actions that are going to maximize benefits in our community. And when we do that, it also works to accelerate climate action. So they both kind of lift one another up. The last step in our process of putting together the Dufferin Climate Action Plan was prioritizing those draft actions that we did that co-benefit analysis on. And what we did is we set up 8 ranking criteria with points associated with them. And each action in the plan was then given a score. And this provided us with a really useful picture to see, okay, well, what actions are most important to our community? What do we need to get to work on immediately? Where do we need to dedicate most of our time? Where do we need to dedicate most of our resources? So this process was really helpful for that. And you'll see up on the screen here, the list of the criteria we focused on. And 3 out of the 8 of them were focused on this idea of co-benefits. And I put this up here just to show you how heavily this idea of co-benefits really weighed into the selection of where we needed to prioritize the actions. So once that was done, we put together our draft of the plan. It went back and forth a couple times between our climate division and our Dufferin County Collaborative. It also went out to the public so they could help us refine it a little bit. And once that was done and it was finalized, we brought it to our county council in March of 2020, as I mentioned. The plan was unanimously adopted. And you can see in this screenshot of the plan in the far left column, in the plan itself, we have little icons that indicate to people when they go to see the plan, what co-benefits that each action is potentially going to bring to the community. So in the red, we have public health and safety. Blue is all about kind of community well-being. The yellow is money, economy, and obviously the green tree is co-benefits related to the environment. And so as we move into the implementation of the plan, we're going to work to make sure that we maximize these benefits. Really, the goal of going through this whole process was to create a plan that could be so beneficial to our community in so many diverse ways that even if climate change wasn't real, which it is, not saying it's not real, it is real, but if it was not real, the actions that we've outlined in this plan, they would be good ideas anyways. And when we brought this to council, our warden at the time really echoed this statement. And he said, take the words climate change out of the equation. Those are actions we should be doing anyways. The fact that this is a big part of the fix for climate change is secondary. They talk to food security, they talk to energy efficiency, protecting natural heritage features, etc. And so it was really rewarding when we got to this point and recognized that the community saw that this plan could be so beneficial to them outside of the scope of climate change, even though that's what our focus was. So hopefully here I've demonstrated and made a pretty strong case for why we should consider co-benefits in climate planning. I've been really grateful to be able to play a part in Dufferin's climate journey, in the creation of this plan, and now as we move into implementation. But if I'm going to be honest with all of you, some days it is pretty hard to sit here in my home office in North Bay because I would really like to see some of these same things happening in the place that I call home. North Bay is really important to me, and so I'm really invested in what our community wants to do around this issue. Up on the screen here, I have a map of all of the Canadian municipalities that have committed to reducing emissions through that Partners for Climate Protection program I talked about earlier. To save you the trouble of counting, there's about 400 of them up here on the map. And I'm just saying that I'd like to see North Bay up here sometime in the near future. So to finish things up, I'm just going to quickly talk about the idea of co-benefits at every level. As I mentioned, I know the municipal level and planning at that level is not going to be applicable to everyone here this evening. So I just want to show you that this idea of co-benefits is really not just for municipalities. Climate change requires the global community coming together, and it requires action from everyone, including municipalities, but also we need residents, businesses, community organizations, different institutions, and other levels of government to be involved in this process as well. And the benefits of climate action can be realized at each one of these levels. And I'm going to walk us through a couple examples to show how that could work. So if we start at the municipal level and we look at something like a community retrofit program, which is when the local municipality provides financing in some form to local residents to undertake energy efficiency measures in their home. A program like this can see a number of co-benefits, and just a few of them are improved resident health, because we see improvements to ventilation and humidity. And this is particularly great for people with asthma or other respiratory issues. And having better air quality in your home can actually improve your mental health too, which is kind of cool. There's also an opportunity to reduce energy poverty. Obviously, energy efficient homes, they're going to cost less to heat and cool throughout the year. And when we take a program like this and we target it first and foremost at low income households, and we design it specifically for them to be able to access this financing, we can really make a good impact on energy poverty in our communities. There's also the opportunity to create local jobs. If we are renovating almost all of our homes, we need the people and we need the supplies to do it. So there's really there's the next economy here, just to throw that in. And then finally, the idea of more comfortable homes. Energy efficient homes are just far more comfortable for people to live in. Recently, we got a heat pump, which keeps us nice and toasty warm in the winter. And in the summer, it doubles as an air conditioner. So we can go out, enjoy the sweaty outdoor activities, knowing that we can come home and be really comfortable. Next, we'll look at the business / organization level. And the example I've pulled for us is around green fleets. So that's electrifying fleets. And there's a picture of a school bus here, but this can also just go for any business that has multiple company vehicles, work trucks. And some of the co-benefits that they'll see is a reduced need for maintenance and repair. I mentioned before that these electric vehicles have less components, and so they break down less often, which obviously saves you money, but also the inconvenience of having to deal with it. Again, electricity is less expensive than gas, so you'll see quite a bit of fuel savings throughout the year. You'll also see better air quality. A great example with school buses is the diesel exhaust has actually been shown to be really carcinogenic. It's particularly harmful to kids, but it's also not great for the bus drivers that are in them every day. So there's a huge health benefit when we switch to electric vehicles with vehicles like that. There's also a reduction in noise, which has been associated with lower stress levels, and it also prevents hearing loss for, again, the people who are in these vehicles day in and day out. Lastly, here, we'll look at the household level. And this action is more so around climate resilience. That's helping our ecosystem adapt to changing climates, helping them survive. And the creation of a backyard habitat is essentially natural features in your yard that support wildlife like birds and pollinators. And this is an action that almost anyone can take, whether you have a big property, a smaller backyard, or even if you just have a balcony, there's stuff for you to do there as well. And when we do these things, we see an improved, again, mental health. You also create a better connection to the place you live in, right? You get in tune with the daily habits of the little critters in and out of your backyard. You have your hands in the soil. It's just a really lovely experience. We can also see some flood protection for our homes when we create backyard habitats. And this happens when we include features like rain gardens. You might also see energy savings in your home. So one thing you could do is plant a row of evergreens, which obviously provide habitat for wildlife. But in the winter, it provides a really great wind barrier for your house. And then in the summer, it might also have a shading and cooling effect as well. And of course, the last co-benefit here, it really does support our local biodiversity, which obviously is very important to all of us. All right, so this brings me to the end of my presentation for today. I can't really see the time on my end, so hopefully I'm doing okay. Great. So it's my hope that I've reframed a little bit what climate action can do for our communities. And it's just my hope that we might have some further conversations in our households, businesses, schools, community groups, and beyond about the types of climate actions we'd like to see happen here locally, and also what some of those co-benefits could look like that we need to prioritize. So before we go over to the question period, I'm just going to make a quick plug for an opportunity that you can all get involved in the next day. The federal government is looking for public comment on their 2030 emissions reduction plan. They've recently adjusted the target to 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030, and they want your thoughts on how we can reach it. The deadline is tomorrow at 11:59 Pacific Standard Time. So if you want to have your say, you kind of have to do it quick, but it is a really great opportunity and an exercise for yourself to think about, well, what are some of the actions we need to get to this target? And also maybe throw in some of those co-benefits that you've learned about to help our country get there. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. And thanks to Alex and Simon for having me this evening.
Round of applause, Kylie-Anne. That was a wonderful presentation. I am very inspired by that great work that you guys have been doing up and down in Dufferin. That's awesome. I will invite everyone to post a question in the chat if you have any, and we can read them out. Otherwise, I mean, I have plenty of questions if nobody beats me to it. I know, it's really, really great. There's some great resources out there to help fill out that Fed consultation. Yes. Okay, well, here we go. Rod, oh, we've got one here from Jessica Love. What has been the greatest challenge in the process of developing the climate action plan? That's a question from Jessica Love.
Thanks, Jessica. So I would say COVID, to be honest. We were part of that Partners for Climate Protection program, and we had a pretty tight deadline in that we had about a year to get this plan together. And I was hired shortly after COVID, and it was really our hope to do a super in-depth community engagement process. You know, in the summer, attend all of the events, talk to residents, go out to community groups, really go where people are. And I showed up just as everything was shutting down. And so we really had to reimagine our community engagement strategy to be mostly digital. And in doing so, we do have to acknowledge that certainly some voices were left out of this conversation in this plan. Fortunately, because it's such a big plan, it's going to be updated every 5 years. So we are going to have another opportunity and hopefully a non-COVID world to hear from people. Because really the most important part of these plans is making sure that they're relevant to the community and they connect with what people care about. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of like technical actions that we can take that people might not be super invested in. So from my perspective, that was one of our biggest challenges.
Oh, I was muted there, but yeah, I can imagine what COVID definitely, I feel like we've all had to kind of pivot our engagement strategies. I know for Rethink Green as well, also with COVID, they got rid of their office space entirely. So we are fully integrated into that community through Zoom world. Now, I think you talked a little bit about wanting to see this in North Bay and, in your hometown. And Rod's asking, he's wondering what you think is the most important way to get municipal governments on board. What are your, what do you think are the hot tips for making that happen here in North Bay?
Yeah. I think part of it is for our council and municipal staff as well. I mean, I can't say I know 100% what their level of knowledge on climate change is and kind of what programs are out there. But I think it's really important for them to know that this isn't something that they have to take on alone. And it doesn't have to be something that's separate from the work that they're already doing. As I mentioned, you can really integrate this climate planning into every project a municipality takes on. And it's actually what people are calling a climate lens. You apply a climate lens to everything you're doing. And with Dufferin, like I said, we were part of that PCP program, which for us provided us with experts. They're municipal capacity building organizations. So they gave us information on the science. They gave us the entire planning process from start to finish. We had people that we could reach out to and set up meetings if we had questions about things or wanted advice. So I think, you know, here in North Bay, we really need our city to connect themselves with the resources that are already out there. We're kind of behind the game a little bit in terms of having a climate action plan, which in a weird way can sometimes be a good thing because so many other, you know, municipalities in Ontario have done this. So we can really look to what they've done and use them as examples. And we don't have to stumble through the process quite as much if you're kind of trailblazing this effort. You can kind of accelerate it a little bit.
Yeah, and pick and choose from the various success stories that have already taken place. Simon, I see you edging forward, getting ready to add there. Go for it.
Well, Alex and I actually met with FCM yesterday, Andy Clay, and we were talking about the Partners for Climate Protection program and how we can further strengthen what we offer under our own Smart Green Communities program, which is again designed to help municipalities and townships to understand these different pathways and to develop these greenhouse gas inventories and all this technical stuff and the climate action plans and implement all these frameworks that you're talking about. And we want
not
to
every municipality has a Kylie-Anne also.
That's right. You know, so we're there to support and enable and fill those gaps. So we're big advocates of the PCP program, and I agree. I would like to see North Bay advance through that process as well.
Yeah, we got some more questions here. Paul is asking, how long do you think it will take the Ontario Building Code to accept more green development standards?
Ooh, that is, I will say, an area that I am not an expert in whatsoever. So I do not know, but I can take that question and look into it and get back to you if you're really curious. I don't know if maybe Simon has some insights on this or Rod. I don't know. If anyone else has insights, feel free to chime in.
Rod?
I was going to look to Dave Smits, who's sitting there very quietly and probably has a little bit of insight. I know there has been step ups, but we're still a long ways. But Dave knows this better than I do.
Yeah, I think we're seeing movement, and certainly the Toronto Green Building Standard is setting sort of a new direction here in Ontario and sort of leading the way. BC has implemented a step code, which makes it very clear to industry where industry is going to need to get to over the next number of years, and they've defined in their code the increasing requirements for energy efficiency as well as sort of getting off gas and decarbonizing their system, and they've laid that out very clearly. Ontario Building Code hasn't moved as quickly at this point. It's not yet clear as to exactly what path they're taking in terms of emulating BC or following the Toronto Green Building Standard, but that's something that I think we all need to continue to advocate for to move this forward and really see, you know, what we're building improving to the degree that it can.
Absolutely. And for those that weren't sure, Dave will be one of our speakers as well in 2 or 3 weeks' time. So you'll be able to hear more about what his expertise is, and we'll be delving deeper into these technical aspects of building design. So it's going to be a good one.
We have a question here from Jessica Love that says, does the PCP program still exist? It is something I had brought up to the city of North Bay in the past, and they weren't receptive at that point in 2019. Yeah, well, I mean, it does still exist, yeah, and Kylie-Anne is living proof. But I don't know, Kylie-Anne, what do you think the first steps are for making this, you know, what would you like to see happen in North Bay? I guess I know you said, you know, having municipalities and council members really integrate that, but I guess, you know, have you seen, like, how can we as community members, you know, have them engage in that kind of thing in the PCP program specifically?
Yeah, I think really it comes down to putting pressure on them, not necessarily in a bad way. I think sometimes too, when we participate in climate strikes, they can be very big and abstract. You know, like our world is on fire, or this and that you see on the signs. But when we try and put pressure on our local governments, if we go to them with a really specific ask, and tell them exactly what we'd like to see happen in our community, and how we want them to do it, I think that's a really effective way to be advocates in our own community. And I know that there's been lots of people in North Bay that have been trying to do this for a really long time. So we're not starting from the ground. There's definitely some momentum going already. But I think we really need to continue to do this, because otherwise it's not something that the city is going to take on unless they know that it's a huge priority for residents.
Yeah, and Paula added there that, you know, over in Sudbury, the local citizens got the city to declare a climate emergency, and now they're committed. But I mean, yeah, it's like, you know, they're committed, and then we want to see it like being developed into something actionable as well. So putting pressure, I think. Yeah.
And it's worth pointing out that obviously, you know, our demographics are changing here in North Bay in many different ways. Prior to the pandemic, there was more in the way of newcomers, as in from other countries arriving here. But certainly during COVID, this mass increase in families from other parts of the province that bring with them different ideals, different expectations about how they want to live. You know, they will expect to see certain stuff in the way of public transit, active transportation networks, parks. Now, we have a lot of these assets, and we have so many good things going for North Bay, and it's important that we celebrate that in the mix. I think some of the areas that we really need to hone in on is, yeah, the policy-based approach to what we're doing, where we're going, what is the vision for the city, how does that tie into sustainability objectives? And it attracts people too, young people especially, that people that want to have families and bring people up here. It's one thing to talk about the natural beauty of our city, but to really respect it and preserve it and look at the spaces in between. And I know Rod will be talking some more about this in his talk, so I don't want to delve in deeper. But Rod, do you have any comments to offer in this talk anyway about how improving the urban spaces, the greening of our spaces could really improve our lifestyle?
Yeah, I think people are starting to recognize, and certainly COVID brought it out, that some of our certainly our green spaces and public spaces within the city have become far more important than they ever were before. And the level of use that they're experiencing is also far, far greater than it was before. And you know, certainly people that are coming from Southern Ontario that didn't have this abundance of outdoor space close to home where they don't have to travel to it or whatever, that's one of the reasons that they are locating to places like North Bay that has that abundance of that type of thing. So I think really smart management of public spaces is going to be a really important aspect of municipal governments in the future for sure.
Kylie, I was making notes, of course, during your presentation, and please, people, continue to put in the chat. We'll just take, I know we've probably got another 5 to 10 minutes to go, right, in this session if people are interested. But yeah, so I was really impressed with the speed at which you've gone through milestones 1 to 3 of the PCP program, and to achieve that during a pandemic. It just shows the willpower that was behind that. So kudos to you and your team, and to everybody there in Dufferin that's pushing forward on this. In terms of the charging stations, plug and drive, maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, how did that go? Was there much interest in the public? Did you get many people show up and try the electric vehicles? And what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. And I'll throw their link down in the chat, because they have a really beautiful and really educational website. So Plug and Drive is a nonprofit. I think they're close to Toronto. And essentially what they do is electric vehicle education for consumers. And their focus is in a non-sales environment. So you can really go in there and learn without, being pressured to buy this make or the next. And so what we did with that event is we invited them to come out. They came with a staff of about 6 people. They set up a tent, and we set up appointments for the community to come out and do an education and test drive session. Typically, these events are kind of just like show up and first come, first serve. But obviously with the pandemic, we had to do appointments. We had 4 different vehicles running test drives. I think it was on the half hour from 12 to 4. And all of those test slots got booked up for the day. There wasn't a car idling all afternoon. And even if it was, it wouldn't really matter. But so people had the opportunity to do a 15-minute kind of orientation session with those EV experts. And then they got to get in the vehicle and kind of take it for a spin around the block. And I'm just going to throw that link into the chat for everyone because I learn something new every time I go to their website. And to tell you the one thing I learned new from this event is I talk and learn about electric vehicles all the time. I didn't know that it's essentially one pedal driving. So that was an interesting experience to have for sure. It was really neat, and how quiet they are as well. You don't even know they're on. It's really cool.
Wait, one pedal driving, like there's no brakes or there's no accelerator. Which one are you giving up?
So I think in most of them, there is a brake, but when you come off of the gas, like you press on the accelerator to go, but when you take your foot off, it kind of stops the car immediately for you. So you have like a really controlled release of the gas pedal that brings you to a complete stop. So theoretically, you could drive the whole car with just one pedal. I'm sure the experts would have explained that a little better than me, but hopefully you get the gist.
No, understood.
We're going to see the relative price of these coming down. I mean, there's been so many mandates being established federally in terms of I believe it's in 2030 or was it early 2026 when no longer there'll be sale of electric of gas vehicles in Canada. So this is going to come eventually, and right now, with the shifts that we're going to see this year as well, there's a lot of incentives out there for businesses, for households to invest in their properties, to maybe look at this alternative technology and install chargers. So it's one to watch for sure, and it's a great way of reducing your own individual footprint, really, as part of the mix. So, big fan of EVs. We talked a bit about carbon sequestration as well, so in the soil and how that's an opportunity for your area. So obviously we know that achieving energy efficiency gains through the retrofits of buildings and designing new buildings, which that higher performance standard that we talked about is the way to go. But just given the nature of how our whole towns and cities are organized, that people need to get from A to B and products need to be transported from one location to another. There's certain resources that are only accessible in some parts of the world, and we need them for essential goods or services. So what are your kind of views about offsetting and where that's going to go, and then the market as a whole in terms of how we can reduce our footprint that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an interesting and emerging field, this idea of offsetting. But I guess I'm maybe more traditional in the sense that I'm the proponent for reduce emissions first, and then turn to this as an example to kind of clean up the rest. And when we say clean up the rest, there's certain sectors that it's going to be really hard for them to remove themselves from fossil fuels. Think of those larger transport trucks, airplanes. So while we're electrifying kind of our more personal use vehicles, some sectors are going to have a really hard time coming off of fossil fuels. It's going to take them a little bit longer. And that's why we need to take action quickly where we can and kind of pull as much weight as we can. And then I think, in my opinion, turn to those technologies is kind of the way to clean up what we can't reduce.
And the bit about school buses, I was kind of getting frustrated during COVID, like seeing buses going around empty, sometimes making multiple different trips because all the scheduling was messed up and spewing diesel into the air. And I was just like, we shouldn't be doing this. Like, how can we? That's obviously a big industry in itself, and it's part of the North American culture, I guess. To get on the yellow bus and go to school. But how do you have any ideas about how we might look to disrupt that as a system and maybe promote more active forms of transportation and encourage participation among children going to school?
Yeah. The first thing I thought of is one of the ideas that we've had for our Dufferin Climate Action Plan is to work with school boards on what we're calling, and I think we probably borrowed the name from somewhere, but it's called a walking school bus program. So essentially in a neighborhood, you know, you have some parent volunteers potentially, they kind of operate like a school bus, but on foot or by, you know, bike, and stopping at houses along the way, picking up the kids, making sure they get safely to school and bringing them back home. And that's a really great way, like you said, to promote active transportation in the community, but it's also huge for social connections with kids as well. I know when I was a kid, we had like bus monitors because everyone was so loud and rowdy. And by the end of my kind of school age career, everyone was just sitting on the bus on their phones. There was no interaction at all. So again, that's another co-benefit, right? Like that social interaction for the kids, and how fun would something like that be for them, while also teaching them what a positive impact they can have on the climate.
Yes,
Final question from me. Feel free to jump in the chat, everybody. If you've still got questions or this is sparking new ideas, this is what it's all about. Yeah, just really interested, you know, we're talking about backyard habitats, you know, what can we do at the household level? So, I mean, maybe you could explain, is there anything that you've done in your house, or particular projects that you want to kind of work on, or products you've tried, something that might inspire people at home to make a difference?
Sure. So I'll say first, like my kind of philosophy when we talk about individual action on climate change is that, you know, we can all do something, but we all can't do everything, at least at this point. So I think it's important for us to all kind of identify where we have the ability to make the biggest impact and what makes sense for our own household, and then kind of work on those bigger goals along the way. So in our household, unfortunately, the program has ended, but there was a provincial program through Save on Energy where you could get all new energy efficient appliances, upgraded insulation, and a heat pump. So that was something we jumped on immediately. Home energy efficiency is so important. It's a big climate action. So when we had this opportunity, we did it. And to talk about co-benefits, like I said, we have so much of a better and more comfortable experience in the home. And there's also every month on the energy bill, we can see direct savings compared to before we did this. And in terms of our next steps, I would really love to own an EV. But the way our house is set up is there would be nowhere to plug it in because our driveway isn't close to our house. So thinking about next steps for us is we're like, well, we'll have to get an electrician to come in and figure out some sort of configuration to make it work. So we started with what was possible, what we could do. And then now we're working to see, okay, what's next? What can we build towards? And I think that's all everyone can really do at this point, is start with what you can do and build towards your goals.
While you're on that point, Paula asks, what type of heat pump do you have? Stash Energy invented one with a storage capacity with no or limited peak energy use. Like, do you have one? Do you know which one what heat pump you have?
I am peeking at it right now. It says LG on it. That I can tell you.
There you go, Paula.
Yeah, I'm not super knowledgeable on those in-depth specs, but it is an LG. And you can also get like an app to control it, which also helps with that energy conservation. So it can be off when you're not home, and you can turn it on right before you come back to warm things up. So it's kind of like a smart thermometer, but specifically for the heat pump.
Great. All right, well, it is 7:46, so we have kept you all to as long as we promised you. But if you have, I guess maybe Kylie-Anne, if you can take one last question, if anybody has one, you're welcome to bring it up. But otherwise, I will, if nobody has any questions, I will just quickly share my screen and show you that our big thank you for coming. And also, yeah, next week we've got Rod Bills on Thursday, the 27th of January at 6:30, same time next week. And we'll look forward to seeing you. It's I have it here, our local hero and president of Remedy Development. He's good. Don't miss it.
Hey, thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.